Danya Taymor is the director of the new musical, The Outsiders, on Broadway. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Danya, I wanted to start by asking you, this book and story are so beloved and so well known to so many generations. What about the story in particular most resonates with you and made you want to, sign on to direct, a musical adaptation?
Yes, I think that the thing that pulled me the most is the authenticity with which the writer Susie Hinton explores what it feels like to be a teenager. And that moment in somebody's life is when they become who they're going to be. So many things happen to you for the first time and you feel it so deeply. And I felt like she really described that experience without pulling any punches, without trying to sugarcoat it in a way that like dove into my heart and talked to the 14-year-old inside me. And that felt really real and really resonated with me, made me want to tell the story.
That's amazing. And let's talk about just the authenticity because you have a really tremendous ensemble of young actors, many of whom are making their Broadway debuts. And they've been with it, in previous iterations of the musical. But what is it like to, help them navigate the experience of coming to Broadway and helping to channel that, enthusiasm and energy into the show because it is such an energetic musical.
Definitely. I think I have so much respect for musical theater as a form because what it asks of every artist who works on it. So all of our performers really are telling the story on a physical, emotional, musical level. And so this to do The Outsiders asks so much of their spirit, their bodies, their minds. And it's been a privilege to be their leader, and to help harness their talent and potential and ideas and creativity and make a space that's truly collaborative, that encourages hard work and rigor, but also humanity and softness and tenderness. And it's been such a privilege to be their leader, and to make a space, it's not just boys, but to make a space where many of these young men can be emotional and sensitive and expressive. I think part of what also drew me to the story of The Outsiders was Susie Hinton kind of investigating the cost of societies, like the way society traps young men or encourages them to be stoic or tough or violent at an expense of love and togetherness. So all that stuff has been really powerful for me.
Yeah, it's so powerfully conveyed on the stage as well. And let's talk about the libretto for the musical because Adam Rapp and Justin Levine have really crafted a beautiful book. The stage directions and descriptions are so rich. How much did their language help you find how you wanted to approach the staging and your kind of visual and aesthetic for the musical?
Yes, very, very much so. I'm a new play director. That's how I like, have come to this material. And even when I work on classic texts, uh, every idea for me comes from language. And so much of the way the physical violence is depicted on stage comes from Adam Rapp's stage directions of the Rumble, which we sort of like took. And then we went back, myself and Rick and Jeff Cooperman, the choreographers, and tried to apply that feeling to everything. Um, Something else that's really special in Adam and Justin's book is the use of silence and pause and what's not said. And that was really impactful to me when I was reading the script and working with the composers to find that balance between silence and noise. And sometimes the most impactful moments are like an incredible big dance number that's fully sung. And then sometimes in the musical, I think some of the most impactful moments are stillness, silence, small. So much of that came from the text. And I think I was also really inspired to make the world, the design of the world, feel elemental and feel raw and gritty, to help make visceral the lives of the young characters.
Yeah, that comes across so well. And I wanted to ask you exactly about the design because I feel like there is such a resourcefulness to what's on stage. It's minimal in some ways, but everything gets repurposed in such unique and exciting ways when you see that car, turn into a bed, turn into the concession stand. It's very exciting for the audience to see how you're gonna, use the materials. What's the kind of message in that? Because I feel like it's so specific to what you're trying to do and say about making the most of what these kids have in their lives. What was the kind of inspiration for that design choice?
I think very early on, I knew that the main design feature of the production wanted to be bodies, wanted to be the young people who are like fighting for their lives to survive. And whatever was the world that was built around them should be something that they could and should manipulate. And I think automation absolutely has its place, but we were really, really careful with using it in this production because we wanted everything to feel like it had to be done by the company, and it is. Um, Something else is that we did a workshop. The very first workshop I did of the musical was in a black box theater, the Daryl Roth downtown, where we just had like theater cubes and boxes on wheels. And so many of the moments that are now on Broadway started in this we don't have anything workshop. And I think that that's an ethos that I really try to hold on to no matter how much production value you have, which is that there's something in the core of like necessity that has so much power, even as you scope it up for Broadway. Like there is spectacle in the production of The Outsiders, and there ought to be. I think it helps tell the story, but it also is really primal. And I think something else that has been in my mind as we create the musical is a desire for it actually not to need anything, so that when high schoolers take it or other theaters take the script later in its life, they don't need anything to do it. They can just take it and make it theirs. So I think that that was also in my mind when we were creating the musical.
Yeah, that's such a terrific point, and so important for future iterations of the show. One of the stylistic touches of yours that I love is how much you draw on the kind of language of cinema. Obviously, film is so important to Pony Boy. We see that right from the jump. And then everything from, the way you bring actually, footage in to the slow motion, the drowning scene, the slap, kind of everything, tilting on an angle. I mean, it's just so visually exciting and borrows from cinema. So, what was the kind of idea behind that? And what moments exactly did you know that you wanted to bring that in? Because it's very careful how it's not, over deployed. It's, very specific moments to kind of leverage that.
I think it's part of the big, like, conceptual desire to have everything feel as though it's through Ponyboy's eyes, and therefore to make the experience of watching the show an emotional one, and one where you feel really close to not just him, but all the characters. And so he does love film. He goes to the movies to imagine and to escape and to dream. And so that language became really important to us. And it also felt like an analog language that could be really, really exciting. And so myself, Rick, and Jeff worked really closely with Hannah Kim, who's our projection designer, who is amazing, an incredibly talented artist. And she's using film texture in ways that I think can't even be perceived. Like in the fire sequence, what you see is not like flames, it's film burn. It's like literal reels of film burning. Like some of the stars are noise on film. Like she's putting treatments on things so that it does all feel cinematic and in an analog, like actual film reel type of way. And I'm just so inspired by the way that she integrated this idea into her work. And then in the physical of it, we use, jump cuts. You think in theater, like, oh, you can't do a jump cut, but you kind of can. You can use light and sound to skip time. And that felt like a really effective way to try to depict some of this violence. So you get out of hyper realism, which is not one of the things that theater does well in terms of violence, and go into something that's like very visceral, really emotional, grotesque. And I think we were all sort of curious about how these more cinematic tools could be applied in a very theatrical way.
Yeah, let's go to the way you convey violence so viscerally and talk about the Rumble, because I do think the Rumble is one of the more extraordinary things I've seen on a stage in a very long time. It's just a transcendent moment in already a very strong musical, and you just kind of elevate the whole thing through this beautiful, I mean, it's very little scoring or underscored, and it just unfolds so interestingly and organically from fight choreo to other choreo. What was your process of putting that together? Because it's a very long sequence. It's technically challenging. You're working with rain. There's a lot of choreo. I have to imagine, putting that piece by piece together was challenging. So how did that kind of unfold as you were envisioning, the many different facets of that moment?
I'll start by saying the Rumble, I feel, is so successful because it is like the height of collaboration. Every single department has its hands in the Rumble, including the music department, by saying, we don't want to put instruments on here. Like that is a musical choice that the composers as writers of the musical made as well. Um, and you've got lights, sound, projection, choreography, costumes, scenic department, special effects, direction. Everybody's got a hand in this incredible sequence, and so that made it really, really fun to create. And then I also have to say to my producers, they put the research and development into it. So by the time we got to Broadway, we started with this lab at the Daryl Roth where myself and the Cooperman started to play with phrases like, oh, how do we want to work? And we kind of developed 3 phases of the Rumble. This very realistic one, then it starts to get expressionistic, and then it goes even further. And we worked with Jeremy Chernick and Lilith Mee, who do our special effects. We went to their warehouse in Brooklyn, played with rain and the grit and the stuff on the floor. And then we did it in La Jolla, where we could really test, okay, what is this like when you repeat this? When you do this 8 times a week, can it sustain? And so by the time we got to Broadway, all of the technical elements had pretty much been tested. So it was about like finessing the creative. And there's a section in the book of The Outsiders, after Johnny and Dolly have passed, where Ponyboy really starts to dissociate. I don't think he would use that word, but that's kind of what happens. He thinks he did it. He keeps seeing things. He keeps hallucinating, and he's really stuck in this very heartbreaking grief cycle. And I wanted to bring that feeling into the Rumble as well. So in the 3rd section of the Rumble, after it's gotten expressionistic, Ponyboy starts to become the only one who's doing the violence. And he's fighting, and it feels good. And he is like in this like incredibly aggressive mode. And then he pulls a body out of the Rumble and picks him up, and he's about to strike him. And he realizes that it's Johnny. And I think that idea came to me because we think that we're doing violence against an enemy, when really our enemy is ourselves, or our best friend, or the person we love the most. And so that kind of came to me from the book, and then through the work we've been doing in the Rumble itself. Yeah, but working on that piece over 2.5 years was such a joy, and to keep refining it and digging in and wondering about it was amazing.
Yeah, that's an incredible moment from the Rumble. And I also just love how much you kind of convey, in some sense, the meaningless of violence, the lighting. We can't always tell what characters are involved, who's winning. I mean, it's just so, perfectly executed. Let's talk about on the other side, some of the moments that are obviously, more intimate and gentler, but equally as powerful. I mean, I think also Great Expectations is such a terrific number. The song is beautiful, and the way you stage it, and the lighting you use, it's just so evocative, and really kind of brings that, beautiful soaring song to life. What was your approach on that, and what was the inspiration for, the spotlight on the individual characters of the ensemble? I mean, it's just, beautiful work.
Thank you. Well, I was a kid who had trouble falling asleep and would have nightmares and would read until I passed out with a flashlight in my bedroom. And so when I read that scene and was working with Adam and Justin on the book, it just kind of came to me that this flashlight could be this tool that like takes Ponyboy into another world, into the book he's reading, but then also starts to alight on his world. And it's one of the most like, it's a staging that came to be in the very first workshop. And it just, sometimes you hit on something and you're like, oh, that's it. And I think that the illumination of all of his friends and himself alone really makes emotionally powerful and kind of clear how Ponyboy feels, because he's not technically alone, and he feels so alone. And that's so like, that feeling resonates with me so much, and I think with so many people. And then when we got to the Broadway production, that's where collaboration just takes it to the next level, where Hannah Kim, projections, and Brian McDevitt just took this seed of an idea and made it like, whoa. And, he lights on all his friends, and Hannah makes this incredible night starry sky, and they just feel like tiny little stars in this big, huge, vast night sky. So that's sort of how it came to be. And then obviously you've got Brody Grant, and, Great Expectations is not an easy song to sing. It's so demanding, the thoughts in it, the story that's being told, and then also the literal notes that he's hitting and the emotional demand on him. And so I also think it takes like an extraordinary performer who's got technique, heart, soul, and belief to deliver a song like that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Another performer I want to ask you about is Joshua, especially little brother in the second act, because the hits certainly keep coming in that, final section of the musical. And I think it's so evocative because of how, the song is long, it's got many stages, but then the kind of end of that number, just watching Joshua, stand on that stage, is so powerful and so simplistic.
Mhm.
So how did you know you wanted to kind of strip that down after the heights of the rumble to just let us focus on Joshua's performance in that moment?
Yes, I mean, when Joshua walked into the audition room, we all kind of were like, "Oh God, that's Dally. That's him. Got to get him. Whatever it takes, we need him." And he's an incredible actor, as you can tell on stage. And when you have somebody who's got so much emotional depth and so open and vulnerable and courageous as a performer, you can really trust them on stage and you don't need to do much. And actually, if you do too much, it's a disservice to what the performer can give. And Dallas is a character who is so misunderstood by society, even misunderstood by his friends because of the armor that he wears. And in the moment that you're talking about, it felt so important to just let the audience really see him. And so we tried a few things, but early on in the rehearsal room, before we kind of really staged it, that the staging kind of organically came to be. And I just thought, oh, I don't think it needs anything else except for Josh and Brody and these two boys on stage, simple together, dealing with what they're going through. That's all it is, and that will actually be harder to take. And if I do anything else or try to illustrate anything else, it will diminish the power of what's happening. And so rarely do we just look at one another and have to deal with one another. And I love that moment too, because not in a confrontive way, it just says, like, look at them, look at these kids, look at these kids. And then when you see a kid on the street that you want to judge, maybe don't, because you don't know what's behind them. And I think that comes from the book for me, definitely. That's one of her biggest messages is don't judge people because that judgment could actually cost them their lives.
Yeah, so powerful. And the simplicity also extends to Stay Gold and Sky's performance. And before I let you go, I have to ask you about that and about just the kind of final tableau and that beautiful light that you closed the show with. I mean, just talk about the inspiration for Stay Gold. It's such a tender song. And then, what note you wanted to leave and visual you wanted to leave the audience on after the experience of, The Outsiders.
So Stay Gold is an incredible piece of musical writing and is one of the first songs that John and Zach wrote. And then when they invited Justin in, the three of them actually took it to another level when we were in La Jolla. Lyrically, it guts me. Melodically, it's so beautiful. And the way harmony works in that piece, it's amazing to sit in the audience and see what happens to people when those two boys start singing together. And then the staging was tricky because I didn't want it to feel sentimental. I didn't want it to feel like, oh, everything's okay. It's all going to be okay. He's back. And so it took some real exploring to find the staging that could walk that tightrope and not say everything's okay or make everything better, but deliver the most important message of the piece. And also, this kid saves his friend from beyond through words. I think so much of the book and the musicals is talking about is the power of words. Like it matters to say I love you to somebody. That actually could make a difference. So don't hold back. And in rehearsal we do a lot of warm-up stuff and a lot of partnering and things to get to know one another. And one of the things we do is mirroring. And there's a moment in Stay Gold where Johnny and Pony kind of simultaneously slide up on the car together, like they have the same soul. And it's a moment of physicality that like guts me. And I think it came out of this work that we've been doing together for weeks in the rehearsal room. And it's the first time we really used gold light in the piece. I talked a lot with Brian McDevitt about color and the power of gold and the importance of sort of holding back until it comes like busting through. And after so much darkness in the second act, literal darkness and emotional darkness, it starts small and creeps in and then explodes. And that final image of every single character against this backdrop, so the whole set kind of like falls apart through the course of the musical. It starts as one thing and then it kind of gets destroyed and flooded and wrecked. And behind it, through that wreckage, more light can get through. And so that image where you can see so much gold light, it's flowing through a broken thing and it's bittersweet. And I think that's what we were trying to find at the end, which was not absolution, but hard-won hope, and a reason to keep going and a reason to reach out to somebody and to hold the people you love close and to not judge the people you don't know. And so I think all those things sort of came into the thinking of what should this final image be.
Yeah, it is incredibly striking. Danya Taymor, congratulations on The Outsiders. Thank you so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thank you so much.